welcome. The BoreCore archive is a collection of slow, methodical recordings of technical processes and perfectly boring routines designed to help you relax and fall asleep. New procedures are added regularly, so don't forget to like and subscribe. Time to relax, close your eyes, and take it on down to Sleepy Town.
Welcome. You are a cemetery groundskeeper. You work at a cemetery. The cemetery is a mid-sized municipal cemetery in a small city, established in 1887, covering approximately 42 acres, containing just over 11,000 marked burial sites, and serving the surrounding community for interments, memorial services, and the quiet, continuous work of keeping a landscape in good order. The landscape has been in your care for 7 years. In that time, you have come to know it the way you know any place you have spent 7 years working in. Thoroughly, specifically, and with a detailed awareness of its particular problems. The particular problems of a cemetery are not so different from the particular problems of any maintained landscape, with some additional considerations that are specific to the function of the space. The turf must be maintained. The trees must be managed. The drainage must work. The paths and roadways must be passable. The monuments must be kept clear of encroaching vegetation. The records must be accurate. These are the ordinary concerns of grounds management, and you address them with ordinary competence and ordinary tools. The additional considerations are that the landscape contains the remains of 11,000 people that families visit to grieve and remember, and that the physical condition of the grounds is, for many visitors, inseparable from the experience of visiting the people buried in it. A poorly maintained grave is not merely an aesthetic failure. It is an experience of neglect felt by the living on behalf of the dead. You understand this. It informs everything you do here, without requiring you to think about it explicitly, because you internalized it years ago, and it now simply operates in the background of all your decisions. Your shift begins at 7 in the morning. It ends at 3:30 in the afternoon. The cemetery opens to the public at 8, which gives you an hour of quiet in which to assess conditions, plan the day's work, and begin tasks that are better accomplished before visitors arrive. You use this hour well. You have used every version of this hour for 7 years. It is the best hour of the workday, in the way that the first hour of any quiet, purposeful work is often the best. The season is late summer. The grass is growing quickly after a wet week. There is an interment scheduled for 10:30 this morning. The grass in Section D needs edging. There are 3 monuments that require resetting after recent ground movement, and there is a drainage issue in Section F that has been worsening through the wet week and needs investigation. You know all of this before you arrive, because you checked the office log and the weather records last night, and because you walked the grounds on Friday and noted what needed attention. Knowing what the day requires before you begin it is not a special skill. It is the habit of someone who has been doing this long enough to understand that surprises in this work are almost always the result of insufficient prior attention. Let us begin. You arrive at the maintenance building at the rear of the cemetery, adjacent to the service entrance off the back road. The maintenance building contains the equipment storage area, a small office where the grounds records and scheduling are kept, a workbench for tool maintenance, a chemical storage cabinet for herbicides and fertilizers, a fuel storage area for the mowing equipment, and a small break room with a table, 2 chairs, a microwave, and a coffee maker. The coffee maker produces adequate coffee. You start it. You change into your work clothes. Cemetery groundskeeping has a dress standard that most municipal cemeteries take seriously. Clean, presentable work clothing, because you will be visible to grieving families throughout the day, and visible in a context where your appearance is part of the setting they are experiencing. Your uniform is dark green trousers and a collared work shirt with the cemetery's name on the left chest. Clean boots, a hat for the sun. You look like someone who works here, which is what you are. This is the appropriate appearance. You collect your coffee and walk the grounds. This is the first walk of the day, and it is not a formal inspection so much as a general orientation. You are reminding yourself of the current state of the grounds after the weekend and after the week of rain, noting anything that has changed or appeared since Friday, and confirming that the conditions you anticipated match the conditions you find. They usually do. This morning, they mostly do. You walk the main entrance drive first. The cemetery entrance is a paved drive flanked by 2 large Norway spruces planted in 1923, according to the planting record in the grounds office. The spruces are approximately 30 meters tall and in good health. Their lower branches have been limbed up over the years to maintain sightlines and allow vehicle passage, and the limbing line is clean and consistent. The drive surface is clear of debris after the weekend. A few twigs from Friday's wind have blown across it and will be collected this morning. You note this. Moving on. You walk through Section A, the oldest section of the cemetery, established in the original 1887 layout. Section A contains the oldest monuments, tall Victorian obelisks, draped urns, elaborate family plots with iron fencing, and flat stone tablets worn smooth by a century of weather. The turf in Section A is the most difficult to maintain because the monuments are closely spaced. The iron fencing creates obstacles for mowing equipment, and the ground surface is uneven from more than 100 years of settling. You mow Section A with a push mower rather than a ride-on, which takes longer but is the only practical option. You note that the turf in Section A looks acceptable after the wet week. A little long, but not excessively so, and the ground is still too soft from the rain to bring the ride-on equipment through without leaving ruts. You will mow Section A on Wednesday, once the ground has had 2 more days to dry. You walk through Sections B and C, which are mid-20th century sections with more standardized monument spacing, making them easier to maintain. The turf here is longer than you would like. The wet week has pushed the growth rate beyond the normal mowing interval. You will address Sections B and C today with the ride-on. The ground in these sections is on a slight slope with better drainage than Section A, and the surface is firm enough for the equipment. You reach Section D, where you noted the edging requirement on Friday. Section D is a more recent section, developed in the 1990s, with flush granite monuments set at ground level rather than upright stones. Flush monuments allow the ride-on mower to pass directly over them, which is efficient for mowing, but creates a different maintenance concern. The grass grows up and over the monument edges, obscuring the engraved text and the margins of the stone. This growth must be edged back periodically to keep the monuments clear and legible. Section D is due for edging. You note that this is a morning task to be done before the 10:30 interment so that the section is presentable. You reach Section F, the low-lying northeast corner of the cemetery where the drainage issue has developed. You can see from the path that there is standing water in a depression approximately 6 meters from the path edge. The depression was not there before this season. It has developed gradually over the past 3 months and has become pronounced after this week's rain. A depression with standing water in an active burial section is a serious maintenance concern for several reasons. It indicates ground subsidence, which may suggest settling of a burial below the surface. It creates conditions for turf damage and erosion. It is a hazard for visitors who may not see the soft ground until they are already standing in it. And it is aesthetically unacceptable in a space where families come to visit. You will investigate this morning. You complete your walk and return to the maintenance building. You pour a second cup of coffee. You review the day's schedule in the grounds office. The grounds office is a small room at one end of the maintenance building, containing a desk, a filing cabinet, a wall-mounted site map, and a computer running the cemetery's management software. The grounds records are distinct from the burial records, which are maintained by the cemetery office in the main building near the entrance. The grounds records document the physical state and maintenance history of the landscape. What was mowed when? What was planted when? What equipment was serviced when? What maintenance issues were found and addressed? You maintain these records. They are your professional memory of the grounds. The site map on the wall is a large format printed plan of the cemetery, updated every few years, showing all sections, all paths, all roadways, the location of the maintenance building, the equipment storage areas, the water supply points, the drainage infrastructure, and the tree locations. The map is annotated in pencil with notes from your years of work here. Problem drainage areas circled in blue. Trees flagged for monitoring, marked with small stars. Sections that require special equipment access, noted in the margins. The pencil annotations are transferred to the digital records periodically, but the physical map, with its accumulated notes, is the working document you consult most often. It is a record of the ground's problems and your responses to them, written gradually over 7 years in the margins of a plan that someone else drew. You review the interment record for today's service. The interment record shows the name of the deceased, the date and time of the service, the section, row, and plot number, the name of the funeral home handling the arrangements, and any specific requirements noted by the family or the funeral home. Today's interment is in section C, row 14, plot 7. It is a full casket interment, not a cremation interment, which means the grave opening will be the full standard dimensions. The funeral home is a local firm you have worked with many times. No special requirements are noted. The family has requested that the area around the grave be clear of equipment and debris for the service, which is standard and will be done. The grave for today's interment was opened on Friday by your colleague, who handles the grave preparation work. You will verify this morning that the opening is as it should be, correctly dimensioned, cleanly cut, with the spoil pile neatly contained, the grave boards in place, and the artificial grass surround positioned appropriately. Grave openings are checked the morning of the service without exception, not because your colleague's work is unreliable, but because conditions can change between preparation and service. Rain can cause a sidewall to soften and slough. The boards can shift. Wildlife can investigate. You check because checking is the correct procedure. You also review the maintenance log from Friday, which your colleague completed at the end of their shift. The log shows the grave opening completed, time and depth noted, spoil pile, positioned to the west of the opening to minimize visibility from the main path. A notation in the comments field: the ground at approximately 1 meter depth in section C, row 14, showed higher than normal moisture content, consistent with the week's rainfall. This is noted but not flagged as a concern, as the drainage in section C is adequate and the moisture level is within expected post-drain parameters. You note this information and will check the opening this morning with this in mind. You enter today's date, your name, and the weather conditions in the daily grounds log. Late August, clear after rain, temperature 68 degrees at 7:30 a.m. Ground soft in sections A and F. Firm in sections B through E. You note the standing water in section F. You note the plan tasks. Sections B and C mowing. Section D edging. Section F drainage investigation. Grave verification for 10:30 service. You note the interment time and location. The log is begun. You go to work. You drive the utility vehicle to section C. The utility vehicle is a small electric cart with a flat cargo bed, used for transporting tools and materials around the grounds. It is not fast. It is appropriate for the setting. Section C is in the central part of the cemetery, accessible by a loop road that services the middle sections. You park at the row 14 access path and walk to plot 7. The grave opening is visible from 15 meters away. The dark rectangle of disturbed earth in the otherwise unbroken turf, the low mound of the spoil pile to the west under a green tarpaulin, the grave boards in place across the opening. You approach and examine the opening. The grave boards are 2 planks of treated timber, each approximately 2 meters long and 20 centimeters wide, placed across the short ends of the opening to support the weight of anyone working at the graveside and to prevent the edges of the opening from crumbling. They are correctly positioned. You inspect the side walls of the opening. The standard dimensions for a full casket grave at this cemetery are 2 meters and 40 centimeters in length, 90 centimeters in width, and 1 meter and 50 centimeters in depth, measured from the surface of the surrounding turf to the base of the excavation. You measure the opening, length 2 meters 40, width 90 centimeters. You lower a depth rod into the opening to check the depth. 1 meter 52. Slightly deeper than standard, but within the acceptable tolerance. The base of the opening is flat and level. The side walls are clean and vertical with no slewing. The higher moisture content noted in Friday's log has not caused any visible deterioration of the walls. The opening is satisfactory. You examine the immediate surroundings. The artificial grass surround a mat of green synthetic turf that is placed around the opening to cover the disturbed soil and present a tidy appearance for the service, is folded and stored beside the spoil pile, ready to be positioned this morning before the service. You will lay it out at 9:30, giving the area its final preparation approximately an hour before the family arrives. The spoil pile under the tarpaulin is neat and contained within the bounds of the tarpaulin. No soil has migrated onto the adjacent turf or path. Good. You note one small adjustment needed. A tuft of grass at the south corner of the opening has partially fallen into the excavation, probably loosened by the rain. It is a small irregularity, but it is visible, and you will trim it before laying the surround. You have a hand edger in the utility vehicle. You retrieve it and trim the corner cleanly. The opening now has 4 clean, sharp edges. You note the verification complete in your pocket notebook and will transfer it to the grounds log when you return to the office. The grave is ready for service. While you are in Section C, you conduct a brief visual check of the surrounding area. The turf around the adjacent plots is in reasonable condition. There are 2 recent interments in Section C within the past 6 weeks, and the turf reinstatement over those graves is progressing normally. Turf reinstatement after an interment is the process of restoring the grass surface over the filled grave to a condition consistent with the surrounding turf. It is one of the more time-consuming ongoing tasks in cemetery maintenance because it requires attention over a period of weeks to months after the interment. After a grave is filled and the soil settled, the surface is seeded or returfed, depending on the season and the condition of the fill soil. New turf over a recent grave requires more frequent watering, more careful mowing at a higher cut height, and a period of time before it can be managed in the same way as established turf. The soil beneath a recent interment also continues to settle for months after filling, which can create a slight depression at the surface as the fill compresses. This settling is normal and expected, and the surface is re-leveled and reseeded or returfed as needed during the settling period. You monitor recent interments as part of your regular section checks. The 2 recent interments in Section C are both progressing as expected. One, 6 weeks old, has turf cover that is approximately 60% established. You can still see the seam lines between the new turf and the surrounding established grass, but the new grass is rooting and growing. Another 2 to 3 weeks, and it will be indistinguishable from its neighbors. The other, 2 weeks old, has been seeded rather than returfed, and the seedlings are emerging uniformly. You will keep this one at a higher mowing height for another month. You note both in your pocket notebook. You return to the maintenance building and prepare the ride-on mower for the morning's mowing in sections B and C. The ride-on mower is a zero-turn mower with a cutting deck 122 centimeters wide, a grass collection system, and a maximum ground speed of approximately 12 kilometers per hour in normal operation. For cemetery mowing, you operate it at a reduced speed, approximately 6 to 8 kilometers per hour in open areas, slower near monuments. The reduced speed is necessary because mowing near monuments requires precision, and precision at speed is less precise than precision without speed. This is true of most things. You check the mower before starting. Oil level, adequate. Fuel level, 3/4 full, sufficient for the morning's work. Blades, you engaged them briefly on Friday before the end of shift to clear the clippings from the last use, and they were sharp then. You inspect the blade edges visually. They are sharp, no notching or rolling. A dull blade tears grass rather than cutting it cleanly. Torn grass is more susceptible to disease and turns brown at the tip, giving the turf a hazy, brownish cast that is visible from a distance. You sharpen blades at the beginning of each week as routine maintenance and inspect them midweek. The blades are sharp. You proceed. You set the cutting height for Section B and see the standard cutting height for cemetery turf at this time of year is 7 to 8 centimeters. This is higher than the cutting height used for ornamental lawns, for good reason. A higher cutting height means more leaf area per plant, which means more photosynthesis, more root development, and more drought tolerance. It also means slightly slower growth rate relative to a shorter cut lawn, which reduces mowing frequency requirements. A shortcut cemetery lawn looks tidy for 2 days, and then looks like it needs mowing. A 7-centimeter cut looks appropriate for 4 to 5 days under normal growing conditions. You set the deck at 7.5 centimeters. You drive to Section B and begin mowing. Your mowing pattern in Sections B and C is a series of parallel passes, each one the width of the cutting deck, with approximately a 10-centimeter overlap on each pass to ensure no strip of grass is missed. The direction of the passes alternates with each mowing. This week you mow north to south. Next week you will mow east to west. Alternating direction prevents the grass from developing a grain in one direction which can make the turf look striped and uneven, and also prevents the repeated compression of the soil in the same wheel tracks, which can cause compaction over time. Mowing near monuments requires a particular technique. When a mowing pass approaches a monument, you reduce speed and make a careful pass around the monument, trimming as close as the deck allows without contacting the stone. The deck can typically approach within 10 to 15 centimeters of a vertical surface. The strip of grass between the deck's closest approach and the base of the monument is left for the string trimmer, which you will use after mowing to trim these margins. Working in 2 passes, ride on for the open areas, string trimmer for the margins, is standard practice. Attempting to get the ride on close enough to trim the margins with the deck risks contacting the monument with the deck, the blade housing, or the deflector, all of which can cause damage to the stone. Some monuments in this cemetery are more than 100 years old and have surfaces weathered to a fragility that does not tolerate being struck by a mower deck at any speed. You give them appropriate clearance. You mow section B in 45 minutes. The grass collection system fills twice during this section, and you empty it in the compost area at the rear of the grounds. Cemetery grass clippings are composted on site in a series of bins at the back of the maintenance area. The compost is turned periodically, and after approximately 6 months of decomposition, is used as a soil amendment in replanting areas and around new trees. The cemetery is largely self-sustaining in organic matter, which is a practical economy and also a process with a certain circular quality that you do not think about explicitly, but which is simply the way things work here. You move to section C and mow the areas surrounding the prepared grave first, so that the immediate area of the service is freshly cut and tidy when the family arrives. You mow a generous perimeter around row 14, ensuring that the path approach to the grave, the area where the funeral director and pallbearers will stand, and the surrounding plots are all freshly cut and uniform in height. Then you continue with the remainder of section C in the same parallel pass pattern. Section C takes 50 minutes, slightly longer than section B because of the denser monument spacing in some rows and the need for careful navigation around the recent turf reinstatement areas. You empty the collection system 3 times. You note the time and the sections completed in your pocket notebook. It is 9:45. You have 45 minutes before the grave surround needs to be laid for the 10:30 service. After mowing, you work through sections B and C with the string trimmer, addressing the margins that the ride-on cannot reach. The strips at the base of each monument, the edges along the paths, and any areas where the mower's turn radius left an uncut corner. The string trimmer is a tool that rewards experience and penalizes inattention. Used correctly, it trims grass cleanly to a consistent height, feathering the cut smoothly into the surrounding mown surface. Used incorrectly, it can scalp the turf at the base of a monument, removing not just the grass, but the surface layer of the soil, leaving a bare ring of earth that is difficult to reestablish and looks, for the months it takes to recover, like a wound. It can also damage monument surfaces. Granite is very hard and resists trimmer line contact reasonably well. Limestone and sandstone, which are softer, can be abraded by repeated string trimmer contact, wearing away the surface and eroding carved lettering over time. Marble is softer still. You use a guard plate on your trimmer when working near soft stone monuments, which limits how close the head can approach the stone surface. It reduces efficiency slightly. It prevents damage to irreplaceable objects. The efficiency reduction is acceptable. Section D edging is a different operation from the post-mowing trimming in sections B and C in section D. The flush granite monuments are set level with the turf surface, and the grass grows horizontally over the monument edges rather than vertically past a standing stone. Edging in section D means cutting the grass back from the monument margins with a flat blade edger, removing the overgrowth that obscures the monument edges, and in some cases, partially covers the engraved text. You work through section D with the flat blade edger, a tool with a flat, half-moon shaped blade that is pressed vertically into the turf at the monument margin to cut a clean edge. You work around each monument systematically. Near edge, left side, far edge, right side, back to near edge. The cut grass material is collected and composted. Where the grass has grown over the engraved area of a monument, you trim it back carefully to expose the full face of the stone. Some of the monuments in section D have been partially obscured for some time, and the grass root mat has begun to grow over the stone surface itself, not just the margins. For these, you use a stiff brush after edging to clear any loose grass and soil from the stone face, and in some cases, a plastic scraper to gently lift the grass mat from the stone without scratching the granite surface. Granite is the most common monument material in this section, and in most modern cemeteries, because it is hard, durable, weather-resistant, and holds an engraved finish indefinitely under normal conditions. It is also available in a range of colors: gray, black, red, pink, green, and can be polished to a high reflective finish or finished to a fine texture. The polished surfaces of black granite monuments catch the light beautifully in certain conditions, and in the morning raking light, the engraved lettering stands out white against the dark polished field. This is something you notice every morning when you work in section D. You do not remark on it to anyone. You notice it and continue working. You complete section D edging by 9:20. You collect the edging debris, sweep the adjacent paths clear with a push broom, and step back to evaluate the section. The monument margins are clean and defined. The engraved faces are clear. The turf is trimmed to a consistent height. The section looks as it should look. You move to section C to prepare the grave surround. You drive the utility vehicle to section C with the artificial grass surround rolled in the cargo bed. You also bring a folding equipment stand, a canvas cover for the spoil pile, and a set of lowering device straps that will be used by the funeral home team to lower the casket. The lowering device itself is provided by the funeral home. Your responsibility is to ensure the grave is prepared in a way that allows their equipment to be deployed correctly. You lay the artificial grass around. This is a set of interlocking sections of synthetic turf mat, thick enough to cover the disturbed soil around the opening completely, and to provide a stable, clean-looking surface for the mourners to stand on. You position the sections around all four sides of the opening, fitting them together at the corners, covering the raw soil of the spoil pile area with a separate section, and ensuring the edges of each mat are lying flat. A mat that has a raised edge is a tripping hazard and will be stepped on and further raised during the service. You press the edges down with your foot and check that all sections are flat and stable. You position the equipment stand at the head of the grave. The equipment stand is a small folding frame on which the funeral home will place the flowers and any other memorial items during the graveside service. You position it where it will not obstruct the pallbearer's approach or the movement of the lowering device. You have set up this stand many times, and the positioning is by now instinctive. Far enough from the opening to be clear of the operating area, close enough to the head of the grave to be visually connected to it, oriented so that the floral arrangements will be visible to the assembled mourners. You take a final look at the setup from the perspective of the mourners approaching from the path. You are standing approximately 15 meters away at the point where the path turns toward row 14. From here, the grave is visible as a neat, contained green rectangle in the turf. The artificial grass surrounds smooth and uniform. The equipment stand in place. The surrounding turf freshly mowed. The spoil pile is invisible under its canvas cover, which is itself nearly invisible because it is the same green as the artificial grass. The opening itself is covered by a ceremonial green drape that the funeral home will remove before the casket is brought forward. You place the drape over the opening after completing your inspection. It is appropriate that visitors should not see the open grave before the service begins. You are satisfied with the preparation. You drive the utility vehicle to the service road and park it out of the way of the main path, where it will not be visible from the service area. You will remain in the grounds during the service, available if needed, but not present at the graveside. Your presence at a service is as a background function of the place, not a participant in it. The families who come here do not come to see you. They do not need to be aware of you, except in the general sense that the grounds are well maintained, which is something they may notice without consciously registering, in the way that people notice a clean, orderly environment without cataloging the specific elements that make it so. This is the correct outcome. You use the time before the service to begin the drainage investigation in Section F. Section F is the northeast corner of the cemetery, the lowest elevation area, which has historically had drainage challenges that have been managed through a combination of surface gratting and a subsurface drain system installed in 2009. The drain system consists of perforated pipe laid in gravel trenches at a depth of approximately 60 centimeters, running from the low points of Section F to a discharge point at the cemetery boundary. The system was adequate until this season, when the depression with standing water appeared. You approach the depression with your probe rod and a notebook. The probe rod is a metal rod approximately 1 meter and 20 centimeters long, sharpened to a blunt point, used for testing ground conditions below the surface by pressing it into the soil and assessing the resistance and the depth to which it penetrates easily. It is not sophisticated equipment. It provides useful information. You probe the depression at several points. At the center of the standing water, the rod penetrates easily to its full length with minimal resistance, suggesting that the soil below is significantly saturated, or that there is a void or loose fill area below the surface. At the margins of the depression, the resistance increases within the first 30 to 40 centimeters, and the rod meets firmer ground. This pattern is consistent with a localized area of subsidence, a region below the surface where the soil has compressed or shifted downward, pulling the surface soil with it and creating the depression. You consult the burial records map for this section, which you brought with you. Section F, Row 8. The depression is located approximately 1 meter north of Plot 4 in Row 8 and 2 meters west of the path. Plot 4 in Row 8 has a burial record. It was interred in 1994, a full casket interment. The burial is 30 years old. Subsidence over older burials is a known and documented phenomenon in cemetery management. The wooden components of a casket, even a well-constructed one, will eventually decompose under soil conditions. And as the casket structure fails, the soil above it can settle into the void created by the decomposition. This process occurs over a timescale of decades and is not predictable in its timing for any individual burial, as it depends on the soil conditions, the water table, the casket construction, and other variables. It is, however, an expected part of managing an older cemetery, and there are standard procedures for addressing it. The standard procedure for surface subsidence over an older burial is gradual fill and reinstatement. The depression is filled with compatible soil in layers, compacted gently, and the surface is regraded to restore the original profile. Aggressive compaction is avoided because the goal is not to stabilize a construction site, but to restore a surface over a burial site with minimal disturbance. The filling is done in multiple stages if the subsidence is significant, allowing each layer to settle before adding the next. The turf is reinstated after the surface has been brought to the correct level and has had time to firm up. The drainage problem is related to the subsidence in a straightforward way. The depression is collecting surface water, which is then infiltrating through the disturbed soil column above the burial, which is more permeable than the surrounding undisturbed soil, and saturating the area, which deepens the depression and attracts more water. Restoring the surface grade will address both the drainage problem and the aesthetic problem simultaneously. You also check the access point for the nearest section of the subsurface drain system, a small inspection chamber at the eastern edge of section F, with a cast iron lid set flush in the turf. You open the inspection chamber and look inside. The chamber is clear and the pipe inlet is flowing, which tells you the drain system itself is functional. The problem is not a blocked drain. The problem is a localized subsidence that is directing water to a point where the drain does not reach. The fix is the surface fill and regrading, not a drain repair. You note all of this in your pocket notebook with sufficient detail to write a maintenance report this afternoon. The fill work will require scheduling with your colleague and will take approximately 3 to 4 hours over 2 visits. You will schedule it for later this week, after the ground has dried sufficiently. You close the inspection chamber, replace the lid flush with the turf surface, and note the time. The interment service begins in 25 minutes. At 10:15, the funeral home vehicles arrive at the main entrance and proceed along the main drive to the Section C service road. You are working in Section E at this point, far enough from Section C to be out of the immediate area of the service, but close enough to observe that everything is proceeding as expected. You watch the funeral home team unload the lowering device and carry it to the grave. You watch the setup proceed without apparent difficulty. You continue your work in Section E. At 10:30, the family arrives and the service begins. You are not present at the service. You are aware of it in the way that anyone working in an adjacent area is aware of a gathering nearby. As a presence, a quiet assembling of people, and the particular stillness that a graveside service produces. A graveside service is one of the quieter events that can occur in a public space. The people present are focused on something specific and are not making the diffuse ambient noise of a crowd. The silence around a graveside service has a distinct character. You have been present at many hundreds of services over the course of your career here. You are not present at them in the participatory sense. You are present in the spatial sense, somewhere on the grounds, working. Over the years, you have developed a practiced awareness of where services are occurring and how to route your work around them, staying at a distance that is respectful without being so distant that you are unavailable if something requires your attention. The appropriate distance varies with the terrain, the vegetation, and the acoustics of the specific area. But as a general rule, you remain out of the sightlines of the mourners and beyond the range at which the sound of your equipment would intrude on the service. When in doubt, you work with hand tools rather than power equipment, while a service is in progress within earshot. At approximately 11:15, the service concludes, and the funeral home team begins the process of lowering the casket and managing the withdrawal of the funeral party. This is handled entirely by the funeral home and the cemetery's office staff, who have greeted the family and guided them through the service. Your involvement resumes after the mourners have departed, and the funeral home team has completed the lowering and withdrawn their equipment. At 11:40, the funeral home team leaves, and the grave is yours to close. Grave closing or backfilling is one of the more physically demanding tasks in cemetery work, and it is done with care and attention. The spoil pile that was excavated on Friday is now returned to the opening in layers. You work with a long-handled spade, moving the soil from the pile into the opening in shovelfuls, distributing it evenly to build up the fill in layers of approximately 20 to 30 centimeters. After each layer, you tamp the soil with the back of the spade to consolidate it before adding the next layer. This consolidation reduces the amount of settling that will occur later and helps bring the final surface to a level closer to the surrounding grade. The soil goes in progressively. The opening, which was a dark, clean-edged rectangle this morning, becomes a mounded fill as the soil rises above the surrounding grade. You mound the fill slightly above grade level, approximately 10 to 15 centimeters of crown, to account for the settling that will occur over the coming weeks. A perfectly level fill will settle below grade and create a depression. A slightly mounded fill will settle to grade. The amount of crown required varies with the soil type and the fill method. Clay soils settle more than sandy soils, and loosely filled soil settles more than tamped fill. Your 7 years of observation at this cemetery have calibrated your judgment for these specific soil conditions. You mound to the level that your experience tells you will result in a level surface after settling. You are usually right. When you are not quite right, you monitor the grave and add more fill as needed. After filling and mounding, you remove the artificial grass surround, fold it, and return it to the utility vehicle. You remove the equipment stand. You replace the grave marker stake, a small numbered metal stake that identifies the plot location and will remain until the family installs a permanent monument. You sweep the path clear of any soil that was displaced during the filling work. You take a final look at the grave from the path. The mounded fill is neat and contained within the plot boundaries. The surrounding turf is undisturbed. The path is clear. The section looks as it should look. You will seed or returf the filled grave within the next few days, depending on weather conditions. For now, the mounded fill is the correct state. After lunch, which you eat at the picnic table behind the maintenance building, you address the tree management tasks on this week's schedule. The cemetery contains approximately 340 trees, ranging from the large Norway spruces at the entrance to young ornamental plantings in the newer sections, to the mature native trees that were part of the original landscape design in the oldest sections. The trees are among the most significant landscape elements in the cemetery. They provide shade. They define the character of different sections. They serve as landmarks for visitors navigating the grounds, and they contribute to the sense of permanence and enclosure that makes a well-treed cemetery feel different from an open field of monuments. Managing 340 trees is a sustained, multi-year program of inspection, pruning, removal of failing specimens, and replacement planting. You maintain a tree inventory in the grounds records, a spreadsheet and a site map showing the location, species, approximate age or size class, and current condition of each significant tree on the grounds. Each tree has a condition rating from 1 to 5, 1 being a young healthy tree, and 5 being a tree in severe decline or structural failure risk. The inventory was last updated comprehensively 2 years ago by an arborist contracted to assess the entire grounds. You update individual tree records throughout the year as conditions change, and you schedule the arborist for an annual consultation to review the most concerning specimens. This week's tree tasks are 3. First, there is a large silver maple in Section B, approximately 80 years old and in condition 4, that has a major scaffold limb showing signs of included bark and structural weakness. Included bark occurs when 2 branches of similar diameter grow from a common origin at a narrow angle, compressing the bark between them rather than forming a solid wood union. The compressed bark does not form a sound wood bond, and the joint is structurally weak, prone to splitting under wind load or the weight of ice. The maple's weak limb overhangs 2 burial plots and the main path. It is a hazard and needs to be removed. You are not an arborist, and you do not perform major tree work yourself. The removal of a large scaffold limb from a mature tree requires a certified arborist with climbing equipment or an aerial lift, and the work involves risks to the adjacent monuments and paths that require professional management. Your job with this tree is to assess the urgency of the hazard, document it, flag it for the contracted arborist, and take any interim measures that are within your scope. You photograph the included bark junction, measure the diameter of the atrisk limb at approximately 90 centimeters from the union, and note the extent of the overhang. The limb is approximately 30 centimeters in diameter at the measurement point, and overhangs approximately 4 meters over the path. This is a moderately high priority hazard. You will call the arborist this afternoon to expedite the assessment and schedule removal before the autumn wind season. The second tree task is routine. Removing the dead lower branches from a row of ornamental cherry trees along the main drive. These branches have died naturally, suppressed by the canopy above them as the trees matured, and their lower growth was shaded out. Dead branches on ornamental trees are removed both for aesthetic reasons, brown, bare sticks hanging at head height on a decorative planting are not the intended effect, and for practical reasons. Dead branches break more easily than living ones and shed debris. You remove them with a hand saw and loppers, cutting each dead branch cleanly back to the branch collar, the slightly swollen ring of tissue where the branch meets the trunk, which is the natural boundary of the tree's healing response. A cut made at the branch collar heals correctly, forming a callus ring that closes over the wound. A cut made too close to the trunk removes the collar and leaves a flush cut that heals poorly, if at all. A cut made too far from the collar leaves a stub that dies back and remains as dead wood. The cut at the branch collar is the correct cut. You make it. The third task is monitoring a newly planted hawthorn in Section G, a small ornamental tree installed last spring as a replacement for a declining specimen that was removed in autumn. New plantings in a cemetery require the same establishment care as any transplanted tree. Regular watering during dry periods, protection from deer browse if the site is prone to deer activity, and monitoring for signs of transplant stress or pest and disease problems. This hawthorn is in its second growing season and is doing well. The new growth this spring was vigorous, and the tree has a good leader. You note its condition as satisfactory and water the root zone from the water tank on the utility vehicle. The water tank holds approximately 200 liters, sufficient for the new plantings in sections F and G. You water 4 additional recently installed shrubs while you are in the area. 3 monuments in the cemetery require resetting after ground movement associated with the wet season. Monument resetting is one of the more technically specific tasks in cemetery maintenance, and one that has significant implications for the families of those interred. A tilted or fallen monument is distressing to see, and the timely correction of leaning monuments is part of the basic care obligation the cemetery owes to those who have placed them. Monuments lean and fall for several reasons. The most common in this cemetery are frost heave in winter, where the freeze-thaw cycle in the soil exerts an upward force on the monument foundation, erosion of the soil support around the base, and the gradual settling of the underlying soil over time. Larger, heavier monuments on adequate concrete bases are more resistant to these forces than smaller, lighter monuments set directly in the soil without a base. Older monuments, particularly those in Section A from the Victorian era, were often set directly in the soil with no more than a few centimeters of compacted earth around the base, and many of them have moved significantly over the decades. The first monument requiring resetting is a granite tablet in Section B, approximately 70 centimeters tall and 50 wide, set for burial from 1978. It has tilted forward by approximately 8 degrees from vertical. 8 degrees is noticeable, but not severe. The monument is not at risk of falling. It is leaning in a way that will continue to worsen if not corrected, and that, at 8 degrees, is visible and concerning to the family who placed it. You assess the base of the monument. You probe the soil around the base with the rod. The south side, toward which the monument is tilting, has softer soil than the north side, suggesting that the tilt is being driven by soil erosion or differential settling on that side. To reset this monument, you will need to excavate carefully around the base, re-level the base, pack the excavated area with compacted gravel, and backfill with soil. For a monument this size, this is a 2-person job, one to hold the monument and one to work the base. You will schedule this with your colleague later this week. For now, you photograph the monument and note the tilt angle, the direction of lean, and your assessment of the cause in the grounds record. The second monument is a flat granite stone in section D that is lifted on one edge by approximately 2 centimeters, giving it a slight rocking motion when pressed. This is a very common condition for flush monuments in areas with active freeze-thaw cycles. The monument is not visually distressing, but the rocking is a maintenance concern. A loose monument can shift further, and in sections with heavy foot traffic, there is a risk of a tripping hazard if the lifted edge becomes more pronounced. You assess the base. The monument is approximately 120 centimeters long, 80 wide, and 10 thick in black granite. Its weight is substantial, and resetting it requires lifting equipment or sufficient leverage to raise it. Pack the void under the lifted edge with mortar or compacted gravel and lower it back level. Again, a 2-person task with appropriate equipment. You photograph it, note the lift measurement and the location, and add it to the resetting schedule. The third monument is a situation that requires immediate attention. In section A, a tall limestone obelisk approximately 180 centimeters in height has developed a pronounced lean of approximately 15 degrees from vertical toward the northeast. At 15 degrees, the monument is approaching a point where the overturning moment of its weight exceeds the restoring moment of the soil support, meaning it is at risk of falling. A fallen obelisk in section A would damage the adjacent monuments, almost all of which are old, and some of which are irreplaceable Victorian stonework. It would also pose a direct physical hazard to visitors. You rope the obelisk immediately with a soft nylon strap around its upper section, and stake the strap to the ground on the uphill side, creating a temporary restraint that will prevent the monument from falling while formal resetting is arranged. This is a temporary measure. The strap will not hold indefinitely and is not a structural solution, but it buys time to organize the proper repair. You photograph the monument and the temporary restraint. You call the arborist contact number, who also handles monument work for this cemetery, and report both the tree and the monument as requiring expedited attention. You will follow up with a formal written report this afternoon. Monument resetting for a tall limestone obelisk of this size is a specialist task. Limestone is softer and more fragile than granite, and the obelisk may have internal cracking that is not visible from the surface. Attempting to reset it without a professional assessment of its structural condition risks causing the fractures that are not yet complete. The correct procedure is to have a stone conservator or monument specialist assess the obelisk, recommend a resetting method, and carry out the work. This will take time and it will cost money. The monument has been here since 1893 and has been leaning for at least the past decade based on photographs in the cemetery's records. It will continue to stand restrained while the proper process is arranged. In the mid-afternoon, you return to the grounds office and spend time on the records work that is part of every week in cemetery management. Cemetery record keeping is distinct from grounds maintenance, but inseparable from it, because the records define the physical plan of the grounds, which plots are occupied, which are available, where the access routes are, where the utility infrastructure runs, and where the monuments are mapped relative to the burial locations they mark. The burial register is the primary legal document of a cemetery. It records every interment that has taken place at the cemetery, the name of the deceased, the date of interment, the section, row, and plot number, the type of interment, the name of the officiant if applicable, and the name of the responsible party. The burial register at this cemetery dates from 1887 and has been maintained continuously since. The early volumes are handwritten in ink in large ledger books that are now stored in archival quality boxes in the cemetery office. The records from the 1980s onward are in digital form in the cemetery management software. The period between approximately 1945 and 1980 exists in both a partial digital record and the original paper ledgers, as the transition to digital recording was gradual and incomplete. This gap in the digital records is a known issue and an ongoing data entry project. Your access to the burial register is for grounds management purposes. You need to be able to identify the burial associated with any plot when you are investigating subsidence, addressing drainage issues near a specific location, or responding to a family's inquiry about the location of a specific grave. You do not manage the register itself, which is the responsibility of the cemetery administrator, but you understand its structure and use it regularly. The plot map is your primary working document. The plot map shows every section of the cemetery in plan view, with each individual plot identified by row and number, and with the occupancy status of each plot coded: occupied, reserved, or available. The plot map is updated by the administrator when new interments occur or plot reservations are made. Your copy of the map in the grounds office is updated approximately monthly from the administrator's master. The map is large, covering the full 42 acres at a scale that allows individual plots to be read, and it is printed in sections that can be carried into the field. Today you are reviewing the plot map for sections E and F in anticipation of beginning the annual section inventory for those areas next week. The section inventory is the grounds equivalent of the museum's object inventory, a physical walk of each row in each section, verifying that the plot map corresponds to what is on the ground. In a cemetery context, this means confirming that every occupied plot on the map has a monument or marker, that every monument or marker in the section corresponds to an occupied plot on the map, and that the monument locations match the plot locations they are associated with. Discrepancies between the map and the physical grounds do occur, typically from historical recording errors, from monuments that have moved significantly from their original positions, or from unmarked burials that were recorded, but for which no monument was ever placed. Unmarked graves are more common in older sections than in newer ones, for a range of reasons. In the Victorian era and the early 20th century, not every family could afford a permanent monument, and temporary wooden markers that have since decomposed account for a significant number of unmarked plots in sections A and B. Some plots in section A are listed in the register as occupied, but have no surviving marker. The location is documented in the register and on the map, but walking the section, there is no physical indication of the burial. These graves are not lost. Their locations are known from the original survey records. They are simply unmarked, which is a state that the cemetery acknowledges and documents without being able to change, because the decision about marking was made, or not made long ago, by people who are themselves no longer living. You work through the E and F section maps, noting any discrepancies between the map and your knowledge of the physical grounds from your regular work. One plot in section E that the map shows as available has, you believe, a flat granite marker that you have been mowing around for 6 years. You note this for investigation. Either the marker was placed without the plot record being updated, or the marker you have been mowing around belongs to an adjacent occupied plot and has migrated, or there is an entry error in the records. You will investigate during next week's section walk and report your findings to the administrator. While you are in the grounds office, you spend time updating the seasonal maintenance calendar, which is the planning document that organizes the recurring tasks of cemetery grounds maintenance across the full year. The calendar is not a schedule of specific days, but a framework of tasks organized by season, frequency, and priority, which you translate into the weekly and daily schedule as each period arrives. Autumn is approaching, and the autumn maintenance calendar is a substantial one. The primary tasks of autumn cemetery maintenance are leaf management, turf aeration, and overseeding, final mowing before the growth season ends, winter preparation of the equipment, winter protection of vulnerable monuments, and drainage maintenance before the winter freeze. Leaf management is one of the most labor-intensive autumn tasks. The cemetery's 340 trees shed a large volume of leaves between October and December, and leaves left on the turf surface for extended periods shade the grass, promote fungal disease, and create a matted layer that can kill the turf beneath it. Leaves on paths and drives become slippery when wet and create a hazard for visitors and vehicles. Managing the leaves means regular clearing of paths, drives, and monument areas throughout the autumn, using a combination of leaf blowers, rakes, and the ride-on mower configured with a leaf collection system. The collected leaves go to the compost bins. The volume of leaves the cemetery generates in autumn is considerably more than the volume of grass clippings generated in summer. The compost bins fill quickly. You manage the compost by turning and aerating it regularly to accelerate decomposition and maintain capacity. Turf aeration is the process of mechanically removing small plugs of soil from the turf surface, or of puncturing the soil surface with solid tines to relieve soil compaction and improve the penetration of water, oxygen, and nutrients to the root zone. Cemetery turf is subject to regular foot traffic, particularly on the main paths and in the areas around the most frequently visited monuments, and soil compaction is a chronic maintenance concern. Compacted soil restricts root growth and drainage, weakening the turf and making it more susceptible to stress from drought, waterlogging, and disease. Annual aeration in autumn, combined with overseeding and a top dressing of compost, is the standard practice for maintaining turf quality in a high-use area. You schedule aeration for mid-October, after the main leaf fall has begun, but before the ground becomes too wet for the equipment. Winter preparation of the equipment is a full day's work at the end of the mowing season. Draining fuel from carburetors, changing engine oil, cleaning and lubricating all moving parts, storing equipment in the correct configuration to prevent damage from cold temperatures. The irrigation system, if any part of the cemetery has one, must be winterized by blowing out the water lines with compressed air before the first freeze. Equipment that is properly prepared for winter performs reliably when it is needed the following spring. Equipment that is not properly prepared sometimes does not start in March, which is the worst time for something not to start. Winter protection of vulnerable monuments is a task that the previous grounds manager instituted in the 1990s for the most fragile monuments in Section A. Some of the Victorian limestone monuments in the oldest part of the cemetery have surface cracking and flacking that makes them vulnerable to the infiltration of water, which then freezes and expands in the cracks, worsening the deterioration. For the most at-risk of these monuments, you apply a temporary protective wrap of breathable fabric in late November, anchored at the base with sandbags that reduces the direct impact of frost, rain, and snow on the stone surface. The wrapping is removed in March. It is not a permanent solution to the problem of deteriorating limestone. It is a measure that slows the rate of deterioration for objects that are irreplaceable, and for which a more comprehensive conservation program has not yet been funded. You wrap approximately 12 monuments each November. You unwrap them in March. The monuments continue to stand. Spring and summer have their own calendar, which we need not cover in full today. Spring is the season of fastest growth and highest maintenance intensity. The turf is growing rapidly. The equipment is being run at its maximum frequency. The new plantings from the previous autumns program need establishment care, and the repairs deferred from winter, the frost-heaved monuments, the drainage issues exposed by snowmelt, the trees that lost limbs in winter storms, are all addressed in the compressed weeks of the spring maintenance push. It is the busiest season. You manage it by planning it carefully in February, when the snow is still on the ground and the calendar is cooperative. We should address the matter of visitors, because a cemetery is a public space, and visitor interaction is a real and regular part of the groundskeeper's day, even though it has not featured prominently in the tasks described so far. Cemetery visitors come for a range of reasons. The most common is to visit a specific grave, to pay respects, to leave flowers or other memorial items, to observe an anniversary or a birthday. Some visitors come to walk the grounds for their own reasons. The older sections of a well-maintained cemetery, with their Victorian monuments and mature trees, have a quality of landscape that some people find genuinely beautiful and worth visiting for its own sake. Some visitors are genealogical researchers, looking for the graves of ancestors whose burial records exist in archives, but whose exact location in the ground is unknown or imprecisely documented. Some visitors are students of history, architecture, or funerary art. Occasionally, a visitor has entered the grounds without a clear purpose and is simply there. Your interactions with visitors are brief and helpful, as a general rule. The most common interaction is a visitor who is searching for a specific grave and cannot find it. Navigating a cemetery is not intuitive, particularly in older sections where the layout does not follow a simple grid, and monuments of different heights and configurations obscure sightlines. You know the grounds well enough to orient almost any visitor to any section. You know which row is which family plots are where the large monuments are that serve as landmarks. When a visitor approaches you with a section and plot number written on a piece of paper, you can bring them there or describe the route with sufficient precision that they can find it themselves. This is a useful thing to be able to do, and you do it willingly. You also occasionally encounter visitors who are distressed, people who are visiting a grave that is recent, or who have come on a significant date, and are affected by the combination of the place and the memory. You are not a grief counselor, and you do not try to be one, but you are a human being in a place where human beings sometimes need a moment of acknowledgement from another human being. And you have learned over the years to read the difference between a visitor who wants quiet and a visitor who would welcome a brief, ordinary human exchange. You have learned not to hurry past someone who is standing at a grave, looking like they might benefit from another person, saying something unremarkable and kind. You have also learned that being unremarkable and kind in passing, without stopping or intruding or making the moment about your own helpfulness, is a skill that requires practice, and that many people have not developed. You have developed it. You use it carefully. This afternoon, while you were working in Section E, a woman in her 70s stopped you to ask about a monument she had noticed that appeared to be leaning. She was visiting her husband's grave in Section D and had walked through Section E on her way back. The monument she had noticed was the obelisk you had already flagged and restrained. You explained briefly that you had already identified the monument as a maintenance concern and that it was being addressed, that it was temporarily secured and not at risk of falling, and that the specialist had been contacted. She thanked you, She said she always noticed when things needed attention and felt better knowing that someone else noticed too. You said you noticed everything here, which is true. She continued toward the exit. You continued with your work. Memorial items left at graves are another aspect of visitor interaction that has a practical maintenance dimension. Families leave flowers, both fresh and artificial, as well as small ornaments, stones, windmills, flags, solar lights, and other items at graves. These items are placed in good faith as expressions of love and remembrance. They also, from a maintenance perspective, complicate mowing, create debris when they are damaged by weather or equipment, and occasionally raise questions about what the cemetery's policy is regarding what may be placed and what must eventually be removed. Most cemeteries have a policy regarding memorial items. The policy at this cemetery allows fresh flowers, small potted plants, and unobtrusive flat items placed at the base of a monument. It does not allow permanent plantings of shrubs or flowers in the plot area without prior approval, because unplanned plantings conflict with the mowing schedule, and if they grow significantly with adjacent plots, it does not allow wind chimes or noise-making items out of consideration for the general atmosphere of the grounds and for neighboring mourners. Items that have deteriorated, been damaged, or been present for more than 30 days are removed by the grounds staff and composted or disposed of. You remove these items as part of your regular section maintenance, and you do so with the understanding that the act of removal is itself part of the care of the place. A deteriorated artificial wreath left indefinitely at a grave becomes, over months, a visual statement of neglect rather than of love, and removing it is not erasure of the sentiment, but an act of tidiness on behalf of all the graves around it. You do not approach this task sentimentally. You do it efficiently and move on. In the final hour of your shift, you address the water management tasks that require attention at the end of a wet week. The cemetery has no formal irrigation system for the turf areas, which is typical for established cemeteries in temperate climates. Established turf in this region can survive normal summer dry periods without supplemental irrigation, going dormant and brown in extended droughts, but recovering when rain returns. The decision not to install an irrigation system was made on cost and practicality grounds. 42 acres of irrigation infrastructure would be expensive to install and maintain, and the turf in most sections recovers adequately from drought stress without it. The exception is the new planting areas, which you manage with the water tank on the utility vehicle during the establishment period. The water management concern after a wet week is not irrigation, but drainage, ensuring that the post-drain water has moved off the grounds effectively, that no drainage infrastructure has been blocked or damaged by the storm, and that wet areas are drying at the expected rate, so that equipment can return to sections that were too soft to mow earlier in the week. You walk the low-lying areas, Section A in the northeast corner of the old section, the Section F depression area you investigated this morning, and the drainage swale along the western boundary that carries runoff from sections C and D toward the boundary discharge point. The swale is clear and flowing well. The discharge point is unobstructed. Section A is still soft, but draining. The water is not standing in the lowest areas as it was on Monday, and the soil is firming at the surface. You probe several locations. The surface layer has good resistance to the rod, suggesting the upper 5 to 10 centimeters have dried sufficiently. You will mow Section A on Wednesday as planned. The Section F depression is slightly better than this morning, but not materially changed. The standing water has reduced by a few centimeters, but the area is still saturated. The fill and regrading work you plan for this week will need to wait until Friday at the earliest, by which time the ground should be dry enough to work without creating additional compaction damage. You note this in the grounds log. You check the main path drainage. The paths at this cemetery are compacted gravel with a crowned profile, slightly higher in the center than at the edges, that directs surface water to the edges where it infiltrates into the adjacent turf or drains into the swales. After heavy rain, the path surfaces sometimes develop ruts or washouts where the runoff has exceeded the drainage capacity of the gravel and eroded the surface material. You walk the main drive and the section access paths. The main drive is in good condition. The gravel surface is intact and the crown profile is holding. 2 of the section access paths in the older areas have minor erosion at low points where the path crosses a slight depression. You fill these with gravel from the small stockpile near the maintenance building and tamp them level. Each repair takes approximately 10 minutes. The paths are passable and will dry to their normal condition by the end of the week. You check the section, iron fencing for any movement or damage after the wet week. Iron fencing around Victorian family plots is a category of maintenance that is genuinely specialized. The fencing is often decorative cast iron that is brittle and cannot be welded without risk of further cracking, and repairs require specialist metalwork. You inspect the fencing visually on your walk, looking for displaced sections, cracked posts, or joints that have opened. One section of fencing around the Hartwell family plot has a post that is leaning slightly inward, the same direction as the slope of the ground inside the plot. The lean is minor, perhaps 3 degrees, and the post is not loose. It is moving with the ground as it settles. You photograph it and note it in the tree and monument monitoring log, which you also use for fencing. The post will be monitored. If the lean increases or if the post becomes loose, a specialist will be called. You return the tools from the day's work to the maintenance building. You clean the string trimmer head and rewind the line. You clean the flat edger. You return the measuring rod and probe to their hooks. You clean the spade and hang it. Clean tools last longer than dirty tools and are ready to use immediately rather than requiring cleaning before use. You clean them every day. In the last 15 minutes of the shift, you complete the paperwork and preparations that close the day. You write the maintenance report for the Section F drainage investigation and the obelisk situation. In Section A, the report for the drainage investigation describes the location, the probing results, the identification of the probable cause as subsidence over the 1994 burial, the drain system check, and its finding of a functional drain, and the recommended action. Scheduled fill and regrading, not drain repair, to be completed by end of week subject to ground conditions. The report for the obelisk describes the observed lean, the temporary restraint applied, the photograph references, and the recommendation for urgent specialist assessment before the autumn wind season. Both reports are written in the same neutral, factual tone as all maintenance documentation. They describe what you observed, what you did, and what you recommend. They do not speculate beyond the evidence or express anything beyond professional assessment. They will be read by the cemetery administrator, who will make decisions about resources and scheduling. Your reports give the administrator the information needed to make those decisions accurately. You update the daily grounds log with the tasks completed, the findings noted, and the conditions observed at the end of the day. The log entry covers the mowing of sections B and C, the edging of section D, the grave verification and service preparation for the 1030 interment, the interment and backfilling, the tree work in section B, C, and G, the monument assessments in sections B, D, and A, the drainage investigation in section F, the path repairs, and the end-of-day drainage and fencing checks. It is a full day's work. You write it in the log without particular emphasis. It is a full day's work, which is what every day here is. You check tomorrow's schedule. There is one interment scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. In section G, the grave has not yet been opened. Your colleague will open it first thing tomorrow morning. You note the interment location and time and leave a note on the colleague's desk with the plot number, the relevant measurements from the plot map, and a reminder about the moisture conditions in section G following this week's rain. Section G is well drained and should be fine for the opening. You note it anyway because knotting it is the correct thing to do. You check the equipment for tomorrow. The ride-on mower needs its collection bin emptied before it is stored, which you do, and the fuel level checked, which you also do. 3/4 full, sufficient for tomorrow's work. The utility vehicle is plugged in to charge overnight. The string trimmer has a fresh line wound on the head. The tools are clean and hung. The chemical storage cabinet is locked. The fuel storage area is locked. The maintenance building is ready for tomorrow. You change out of your work clothes and hang them for tomorrow. You turn off the lights in the grounds office. You lock the maintenance building. You walk to the staff gate and lock it behind you. The cemetery is quiet in the late afternoon in a way that is different from its quiet in the early morning. The morning quiet is the quiet of a place not yet inhabited by the day. The late afternoon quiet is the quiet of a place that has finished with the day and is settling back into its ordinary condition. The mowed sections lie in parallel lines of light and shadow. The monuments stand in the slanted light, their shadows long and pointing east. The prepared grave in Section C has been backfilled and mounded, and will be indistinguishable from its surroundings in a few weeks, in the way that the grounds absorb all disturbance eventually and return to their steady, maintained condition. Everything is as it should be. You leave. You have completed a day as a cemetery groundskeeper. During this day, you walked the grounds at 7 in the morning and assessed their condition. You verified a grave opening and found it satisfactory, with one minor correction applied on the spot. You mowed sections B and C with the ride-on mower, a total of approximately 9 acres of turf at 7.5 centimeters. You edged section D, clearing 47 flush granite monuments of overgrowth and debris. You prepared a grave for a 10:30 service, laid the surround, positioned the equipment stand, confirmed the approach and sightlines. You were present on the grounds during the service, out of sight, available. You backfilled and mounded the grave after the service. You investigated a drainage issue in Section F, identified the probable cause, and documented the recommended repair. You removed dead lower branches from 5 ornamental cherry trees. You watered newly installed plantings. You photographed and documented 3 monuments requiring resetting, applied a temporary restraint to an Etrusc obelisk, and called a specialist. You reviewed plot records for sections E and F. You updated the seasonal maintenance calendar. You wrote 2 maintenance reports. You updated the daily log. You prepared the equipment for tomorrow. You also spoke briefly with a woman who noticed a leaning monument. You told her it was being taken care of. It was. The work of a cemetery groundskeeper is the work of maintenance in its most sustained and least celebrated form. The grounds do not improve in any dramatic way. They do not decline in any dramatic way either, which is the point. The work is a resistance to decline, applied continuously across 42 acres, across all seasons, across the entire span of a career. The grass grows and is cut. The monuments settle and are reset. The trees are pruned and eventually removed and replaced. The records are kept. The drains are cleared. The paths are repaired. Nothing is finished and nothing is abandoned. The work goes on. The 11,000 people in this ground were placed here in the expectation that the ground would be cared for. Some of them were placed here over 100 years ago and have had more successors to their care than could have been imagined when they were buried. You are the current iteration of a line of people who have kept this place. You will not be the last. There is a practical comfort in this, of the kind that comes from working in a place with a longer horizon than a single career. The grounds will outlast you. The work will outlast you. The grass will keep growing after you have stopped cutting it. Someone else will cut it. This is fine. This is, in fact, the correct outcome. You have kept the place well. You have written it down. You have left it ready for tomorrow. Good night. The grass will need cutting again on Wednesday.